Okay, missile guidance. Should you use radar, infrared, laser guidance, remote guidance, Lua guidance? What are the pros and cons of each? And what are the different defense mechanisms that your targets can use against them? Flying in the background, I have one of my test dummies. This one's coded in Lua just to do circles around the platform, and it doesn't have any missile defense mechanisms, so we can test missiles against this and against other ships with different CWIS systems, radar decoys, infrared flares, laser anti-missile systems, and even anti-missile missiles. So let's start with the radar seekers. And these are I would say, the simplest and easy to make, easy to use, low cost. They don't rely on any detection from your vehicle or any other supplemental guidance system. All you have to do is slap on the active radar seeker, and this missile, and each missile is individually going to seek out a radar signature and guide itself to the target. So I'm going to go ahead and launch one of these up, and you can see for yourself it's got a 1 second guidance delay and thrust delay, but it is able to seek the enemy, find the enemy, seek it out, and guide the missile to it. Now it just guides the missile to where the signature is coming from. It doesn't predict anything. It doesn't look ahead. But we'll look at different guidance systems and how we can use those on these missiles later in this video. So radar seekers work really well against small flyers, beginner ships, medium difficulty ships, but as you get up higher in difficulties or against bigger ships, they're more and more likely to have a radar decoy. And a radar decoy is a very hard counter to these. It completely negates the ability for your radar seekers to detect the accurate target and guide the missile in. And I'll give you an example of that here. Let's do from the hard difficulty, the Ray from the Steel Striders. Now the Ray has a thermal flare and a radar decoy that shoots up the second it sees a missile coming at it. If I launch a radar seeker at the Ray, you'll see the flare go up and the missiles go off course. They find the radar signature from the radar decoy, and they'll get completely distracted, and it negates any ability for our missiles to hit our target. So like I said, while good against smaller vehicles and beginner campaign stuff, not as good against later campaign or harder difficulties. So next, let's move up to the infrared seeker, and I'm going to put my test dummy back out. This is in the Steel Strider colors. There we go. Now the infrared, it works the same way as the radar seeker head, in that it looks for, it on its own, it detects the enemy and guides the missile in. It doesn't rely on any detection equipment or any supplemental guidance, but it does rely on a thermal signature. So instead of radar, now we're looking at the thermal signature of the enemy. This target is specifically designed to show that some vehicles can throw a very low thermal signature, whereas a radar signature is a little bit more difficult to hide unless you're underwater. As long as you're above water, the only way to mitigate or reduce a radar signature is different materials on the exterior. But to reduce a thermal signature is a little bit easier. In this case, we're using internal steam engine and Deddy blades, because heat is thrown off by fuel engines or exhaust, and then thrusters. So infrared seeker, one, has the drawback that it's a little bit easier to mitigate the detection, but it also does work well against certain other vehicles, and it is likely to pinpoint parts of that vehicle where the exhaust is coming from or the thrusters are, which is usually a point that you do want to hit. So a lot of cases, the seeking out an infrared target through thermal signature is an effective way to seek out and find a very vulnerable point on the ship. Sometimes they can be thrown off, and I'll give you a review of that really quick. So in the defense mechanisms, there are these decoys they can have on the ship. So if you have a heat decoy, then your missile will end up hitting this instead of the more vulnerable part of the ship. So that's something to think about as well. The other drawback to the infrared seekers is that they only look out in a 120-degree arc in front of them. They don't see to the side or behind them as well as the radar one does. So in this case, I will launch this up and I'll show you what it's like when it doesn't find the vehicle and ends up, well, in this case it will. So if you get lucky, the missile will go up and it will find its target with the thermal signature, and we'll be able to aim towards it. But when you have a vehicle that's in the wrong direction, to the side or behind the missile, these ones have a lower ability, or don't have the ability to detect behind them. So let's give it a few seconds. I'll reload and then I'll launch them again and show you what I mean by that. So here we go, up, and because the test dummy's behind us, the missiles won't be able to detect behind them and they'll fly off into the sunset. So the way to fix that with infrared seekers is now we have to introduce some sort of let's assist the infrared seeker, aim it towards the enemy. And there's two main ways. One, you can throw it on a turret, but that has the drawbacks of course, added cost and then added huge vulnerability. If you lose the turret, you lose everything on the turret, including the missiles and the whole system. The other alternative is you can just add a one turn, and the one turn will just turn the missile towards the enemy before you activate the guidance. So we put a 2-second guidance activation delay, and then we'll do a 2-second thrust delay. Copy that to all of our missiles, and then we'll launch it up using the missile ejector. Of course, we do lose one of our modules because of this, so that's the downside. A little bit of our explosive payload was lost due to having to have the one turn. But now we do have a more reliable way of finding our enemy and seeking out with an infrared signature. We go up, and you'll see the one turn will point it towards the enemy, and then the thermal signature will be detected by the infrared seeker, and it will guide the missile in. And like I said, this has a very low thermal signature on this vehicle, so the missiles have a very hard time continuing to track that, and they'll fly right by. So let's test against an enemy with a higher thermal signature. And then at the same time, I'm going to show you the drawback, the same drawback we had with the radar seeker, we have with the infrared seeker, and that is that thermal decoys or flares can throw off our signal as well. So I'm going to put the ray back out, and now I'll shoot off the infrared seeker again with the one turn up, and it will be able to detect the enemy, but the problem is, again, the infrared flares will throw off our target. So in this case, we can try to move towards guiding our missiles with alternative means, or we can look at the single pixel infrared head. And this single pixel infrared seeker head is specifically for countering decoys. So now what this does is, instead of looking in a broad arc 120 degree in front of the missile, it looks for a very narrow field of view in front of it. And once it locks on a target, it's much more likely to stay on that target. But it's, of course, this does mean now you need to have a turret, or you need that one turn in order to get the missile to point in the right direction towards the enemy and lock on. But now we are less likely to actually be distracted by any sort of flare or decoy. So I'll try the ray again, and this time we're going to launch the single pixel infrared. Of course, again, like I said, it's its own detection, its own guidance, but all we need to do is make sure that we're pointing it towards the enemy and allowing it to lock on before it gets distracted. So sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not 100% reliable, so I shoot it up, it will detect, find the enemy, and you can see it sees the flare, but it's trying to stay on target, and it actually, okay, so it was thrown off, but it did a better job than the infrared seekers. So the infrared seekers will immediately see the flare and go straight up, giving, oh, and the flare's gone. So if the flare gets shot back up, there we go, they get distracted. Now let's see if we can do the same with these guys, or if they'll stay locked on target. So now this is the infrared single pixel seeker, and now you can see it was very, very good at staying locked on to the target. So that's how you use single pixel infrared. They do help with the one huge drawback of decoys. But they still require at least some sort of one turn or a turret to help them aim towards the enemy in the first place. Alright, next up is the laser designated missiles. So if you're getting sick of going up against a lot of enemies with decoys and your missiles are always getting thrown off target, then you want to look at either the laser or the remote guidance systems. Now these rely on your vehicle's detection system and a remote guidance system to get them to the point that you want them to hit. So in the laser, it's very, very simple. You just add a laser designator to the front, and then you do need to build an additional missile connector out to the outside of your vehicle, and at some point with a clear field of view to your enemy, you need to have the missile laser painter. And this, of course, adds a little bit additional cost. It's 150 materials to build this, but it adds a lot of vulnerability. So this has to be on the outside of your vehicle and in the line of sight of your enemy. So your enemy does have a clear shot, usually at this missile painter. But if you are able to get this to work and have it detect your enemy, once I turn this on, the missiles will be able to see that point where the laser is painting. So it'll paint a block and say aim here, and these missiles will just go for that point. They ignore any sort of flares or decoys of any kind, and they just go right to the point where the laser is pointing. But like I said, the biggest drawback is the vulnerability. If I lose this laser pointer in battle, and then I try to launch my missiles against the enemy, you'll see that there's no way for them to be guided. They have no internal guidance detection system. They have to rely on that laser pointer to have a clear field of view, and that your detection systems on your vehicle are pointing that laser at a good point, in a good direction. So last up is the remote guidance system. Now, the remote guidance system removes that vulnerability that you have with the laser one. So you don't have to have anything on the outside of your ship guiding your missiles. It's all internal. So this becomes something that you need to put on the inside of your ship and attach it to your mainframe. So in order to get a remote guidance system on your missile, you don't need anything on the front for seeker heads. It is actually in the fuel and control, and it can be placed anywhere on your missile. It doesn't have to be at the front. But once you have a remote guidance system on your missile, it doesn't rely on any other module. It's just this. And then on the inside of your ship, you're going to need to include general processing cards. And to know how many per missile, you can see inside in the missile menu, under just general processing power used, you'll see a number. That's how many general processing cards you need per missile in the air at each time. So at one time. So if you have 3 missiles in the air at one time, you need 9 times 3 number of general processing cards. And you can see now why this is a huge drawback, because the cost of one general processing card is 100 materials. So while being the best, most reliable, and probably safest way of guiding your target, your missiles to your target, it is also the most expensive route. So I'll show you how this works. It goes up into the air. Of course, it's going to ignore the flares, and will go right into, instead of where the laser's pointing, that's turned off. It's pointing to where it's going to where your mainframe is pointing. So your mainframe says aim here, and your missiles aim there. Now you have to remember that both of these, the laser designator and the remote guidance, are relying on your mainframe's target point, which can change. So the missile might decide in midair, now I want to go to a different target. So if the laser points to a different block, all the missiles will decide, now I have to go to that block. Same with the remote guidance. If your mainframe says now aim here, they will all change mid-flight and aim somewhere else. Whereas with the internal, each missile is its own guidance system, and it ignores everything else on your ship. So there's the differences between the built-in ones. Now I want to look at, we'll look at first, I guess, different defense mechanisms against these missiles, and then I'll go into how guidance modules work, and then how Lua missiles work and the benefits of those. So I'm going to take out the ray, and we'll show you a example of a close-in weapon system, a CWIS system. So if I go to the Steel Striders medium Excalibur and turn it off, we're going to see an example of APS anti-missile system. So I'll launch the, let's say we can afford to launch one remote guidance missile at the enemy. So I'll launch one. And the Excalibur does have a defense mechanism against missiles. If it works. Not working. Let's see here. Let's try this again. And we'll launch one again. All right, here we go. So here we go. So the APS guns are used to try to destroy the missile before it gets to the ship. That way there's no need to try to distract it, and it will work against any sort of missile, even if they're being laser guided or remote guided. So in this case, you can see that having a remote guided missile still has a very strong counter to it, depending on the enemy that you're going up against. And so because of the cost of each one of these, it takes initially to run it and to guide it, it can be quite expensive to lose these to a CWIS system. So the alternative is well, let's go back to our radar seekers, and as long as it doesn't have flares, we can launch more of these because they're cheaper. And now even if I lose one, two of them may be able to get through, and we can overwhelm its defense mechanism. Oh, it took out two. Oh, it took out three. But you can see what I mean, how if one can get through or two can get through, you may be able to design a system that's more cost effective and overwhelm the enemy. So let's take out this, and now let's look at a LAMS. Of course, the Scarlet Dawn has amazing vehicles and examples for LAMS. So I think let's do the Event Horizon. Let's see, there we go. So this one, I don't think we'll get any through. The LAMS is, once you get to very hard difficulty ships, you'll notice that missiles in general become quickly hard countered by the LAMS, and you can see it'll just annihilate them as soon as it gets within probably around 300 meters. So in that case, if you want to use missiles, you're going to have to dramatically reduce costs of missiles and swarm it with as many as you can, or go with larger missiles with higher health. All right, next is the anti-missile missiles. And there's not a lot of examples of these But I think the deep water guard uses these. If I think, let's see, the godly. Oh, the Buccaneer will. There we go. So let's look at the Buccaneers. Oh. Did we launch it? Oh, we did. Alright, so the Buccaneer, I believe, has anti-missile missiles. Let's see if this works. There we go. So we can see the missiles come out, and they're going to try their best to take out the missile. Of course, it doesn't work, but you can see what I mean. The anti-missile missiles will try to shoot at, will try to target another incoming missile and take it out before they hit the enemy. Alright, so we've gone over the different sorts of defense mechanisms. Lastly, just for fun, I want to show one ship that uses all of them. So I'm going to spawn the Steel Striders tier, and then we'll launch everything at it. And you'll see it has flares, it has decoys, it has lambs, and it has anti-missile missiles, I think. Or no, it has anti-missile APS cannon. Oh, here's anti-missile missiles. It's got everything. So you may run into some vehicles in the godly designs that are just, missiles may not be the best weapon to use against them. Maybe you want to try something else because their ability to take out, here we go, to counter missiles, it gets to be a little out of hand. So that's the defense mechanisms that your targets can use. Now let's go over the last one, which is speed. So one of the best defenses against missiles is to just go fast and change direction. So I'm going to put my test dummy back out. And we're going to show an example again of, let's just use our remote guidance. Why not? So remote guidance is going to look for the enemy and find its point, the point where the mainframe is pointing, and say go there. Now, of course, because the enemy's flying so fast, that point's constantly changing, and we're not actually predicting that point. We're just going to react to it, and so we almost always end up hitting these targets from behind, and that adds a huge amount of flying time to our missile. We could run out of fuel, or we could just end up not being able to catch up to the enemy if the enemy's fast enough. Some of the Lightning Hood vehicles go over like 150 meters per second. So unless we have a super fast missile with a long range and we don't get shot down on our way to it, we may want to look at some sort of a guidance or prediction guidance system. In that case, we can look at adding this module. Now this does take up a module. So we've lost some of our payload capacity for our warheads, but now with a prediction guidance module, it works in conjunction with a seeker head. In fact, it works in conjunction with the radar seeker, infrared seeker, single pixel, but it does not work with the laser. So the laser will always point to where the laser's pointing, where it's painted. It won't go to where it's being predicted, but it does work with remote guidance. So in this case, I've hooked it up to an active radar seeker and put a predictive guidance on. And now we'll see how we can predict the motion of our vehicle. So when it goes up into the air, it'll actually now point ahead of the vehicle. And now we've reduced that long arc that we've created. There's still a little bit of an arc there, but we are now hitting the vehicle in the side because now it's predicting where the vehicle will be at intercept point. So that's one of the ways to use predictive guidance. It helps save fuel. You don't require as fast of a missile. You don't even require as many fins. We can do this with a reduced turn rate, because all it's going to do is it's going to find where the enemy is going to be and head that direction. APN guidance does the same thing, but instead of directly anticipating where it's going to hit the target when it gets there, it's a halfway point, sort of. I think you can think of it as it's a little bit like we're going to head towards where the target is now, but we're going to be sort of prepared to aim in where they're headed. So it's like an in-between between the two. It works better against vehicles that have a constant like acceleration or a constantly changing acceleration, or where they're like bobbing up and down or left and right. It's a little bit better than predictive guidance at hitting those. But it's still, obviously, you're still going to have trouble hitting anything that's constantly accelerating. This vehicle is accelerating in a circle, but the acceleration is small enough that these aren't affected by it. But if this thing was bobbing up and down, our missiles would have a hard time hitting, especially the predictive guidance. APN just does a little bit better against that. So with the APN, you'll see now it does anticipate, like it does aim in front of it, but it's still going to have that arc, and it's still going to end up coming in slightly behind in the back of our enemy target. So it comes along the side, but it catches up to it, sort of anticipating its direction, but still making sure that it won't miss if it was to change direction quickly. So APN guidance is highly recommended against some of the faster vehicles out there. Now, one thing I want to do, I think let's compare the two at the same time. So I've given them different smoke colors, but you'll know the one here on the right with the, I think it's the blue, is the remote guidance, and the one on the left here coming in at an angle is our APN guidance. You can see the difference between the two. The blue will hit it in the side, and the other will hit it from the back. If I compare these now to, let's do APN compared to a regular radar seeker. So the APN is going to come in a little bit more in front of the vehicle, and the radar seeker is going to come way behind it because it has no prediction guidance whatsoever. So you can see there, I just hit with an APN and then comes in the radar seeker. So the radar seekers are all coming in last, hitting it in the back. Lastly, let's look at a Lua-coated. So the Lua-coated missile, it requires a whole lot more than any of the others. Everything the remote guidance has, except instead of a remote guidance unit, we're going to use a Lua receiver. And then we still need the general processing cards. It gives us the amount. It should be the same as a remote guidance. Now we also need to include Lua transmitters, and every single launch pad needs to have one of these attached. And again, that's more added cost. They're 100 each. And we need a Lua box, which we only need one of these. It's 90 materials, but one of these can handle all of the missiles on your ship as long as you want them to follow the same commands. So a Lua missile, while not needing to take up the extra module for the guidance system, I guess the benefit, because of the added cost, is you can now have more room for payload, explosive warheads. So these are I would say, the most advanced missile you can design, the most costly, but they also are definitely the best. The guidance is now you control everything you want it to do. You want it to fly close along the water and then go up and hit the target from underneath. Whatever you want it to do, it can do. You just have to code it. And I'll go in another video after this and show you how to code missiles to do what you want them to do. I'll go over how to make this very simple code, and then we can go over other more difficult or more advanced topics if we want to. But in this case, I'm going to launch these, and you'll see now the straighter the line to the enemy, the better the prediction was, right? So these are going directly to where it thinks it's going to hit the enemy. And you can see now instead of any arc at all, these are going to hit directly into the side because it's accurately predicting the speed of the vehicle and where that intercept point is going to be. Now, if I compare this even to the predictive guidance built into the game, you'll see that it performs even better at predicting the enemy and has a straighter line. And that's if you want to code it that way. We can code it to perform similarly to any of these other missiles. In the case of the laser, though, I don't think we can aim it at a specific pointed block, but we can do anything that the remote guidance system can do. So let me compare now the Lua coded to the predictive guidance, and you'll see on the left is going to be our Lua, and on the right is going to be our Lua. On the left is going to be the predictive guidance, and you see the arc now of the predictive guidance compared to the Lua's perfectly straight line, and that's just because the missile's got a better prediction system. And so the Lua gives us a huge advantage to reducing our missile flight time and reducing the need to even be able to turn our missile. We can operate these with even so basically we can take out the fins and add an extra warhead. And if you really wanted to risk it, you could take out the extra fuel and add another warhead. And so in this case, these missiles are relying completely on their prediction to hit the first time and not have to turn, not have to correct, or not have to turn around and come back. And so these missiles now are way more powerful, but they are relying on the Lua code to get them to the target, which they can do as long as we don't have too much of a bobbing up and down or a acceleration on the vehicle. Of course, with Lua code, you can do any sort of prediction or forecasting of vehicle movement that you want. So that's about it for missile guidance and missile defense mechanisms. I think you know a little bit now about the pros and cons of each. In my later video, I'll go over how to code a Lua missile, but I hope this helps. Thank you. Goodbye.